communities, because that seems to me one of the critical issues for many heritage organisations. I mean, not just ecomuseums, but many other heritage organisations. Diana, I don't know if you want to say where that question came from and how it links into your concerns in Spodden.
I'm just going back to going, oh, did I?
Honestly, you did. I've got the email.
I did. I remember now. So working with communities and it being sustainable. I mean, the pandemic, I think, has thrown up an interesting 18 months as well in terms of making sure that we're sustainable and we're still hooking in and linking with the communities for Spodden, not, things not necessarily always physically happening on the ground, I think has been quite a challenge over the last 18 months. But yeah, just going forward and making sure, I think that we're just really conscious and have been right from the start, working with the town clerk, the town council, who are very limited in terms of funding, capacity, all of the community leaders who we're working with. Again, like I said earlier, it's all the doers, isn't it? It's the people who are involved with kind of doing everything locally. If they're involved with this, they're probably organising the local litter pick as well, or 10 other kind of things that are happening locally. So it's kind of making sure that we're not adding too much, that it can be sustainable, it can be managed in the longer term. So I talked earlier, I think, about the idea of not adding more events, so working with existing events that are happening, working with, like I said earlier as well, with the walking groups who are already looking for good routes to walk, but that can be that kind of that eye that's over, looking and seeing and reporting if there are any problems and issues. But I think definitely getting more, filling the funnel with younger people who want to actively be a part of a project like an eco-museum is just fantastic, because it, not only are they kind of doing something locally in their community, but it's engaging with their local landscape. So thinking about, awareness of your landscape and the kind of natural world we all know is so important in terms of understanding the value of it and the kind of risk that it's at. So we've been doing things like the Spodden Valley Explorers. So that's about this idea of joining a club, but using creativity to kind of encourage our young people and families to want to go and explore. It's almost, and we're kind of exploring this model, as we really like the idea of the kind of scout badge system, this idea of kind of and also working with the local schools as well. So projects like Fabric Lenny's, where he's doing something really interesting, he's taking that heritage, creating new music, but he's 3D printing the sculptures that will sit as artifacts. So I think it's kind of hooking into things that young people are interested in as well. And he's also going to be looking at creating some AR content, augmented reality content for us as well, that people can go and explore through their mobile phone, so that things come alive. And he'll do workshops as a part of that. So kind of giving people the skills to be able to create their own animation. And you saw the mood board as well from Angie, this idea of kind of taking the character bags with the drawers and the artifacts, and actually, because AR content's brilliant, isn't it, but you can't be actually handling objects and things. So yeah, I think it was, that's always been our concern right from the start, is to not create a monster that has to be fed and managed. So in terms of sustainability.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. You've got to have something that is manageable, something that you can actually cope with. Because often ecomuseums, and I think most of the ones I know, don't have huge resources. They don't have permanent staff. They don't necessarily have, very significant funds. So having something that you can cope with is very important. Angus, can I ask you a question? Because I know that through the EU LAC Museums project, the young people on Skye, and particularly those from Staffin, were really involved in that project. I wonder if could you reflect on that a bit?
Yes, the school pupils are now fully formed adults, and they're actually just to explain a bit of that project. As I came into post, actually, it was right away. I was kind of informed that some local pupils had been selected from, I think, their fourth year in Scottish terms, which is the 15 to 16-year-old. They had been selected from their school to go on exchange to Costa Rica and the Central America, due to I think Karen might even be here. Karen Brown was here at one point. I saw her name pop up, and Karen Brown from St Andrews University, and she had studied our ecomuseum concept in a lot of detail and wrote some very good papers, and this attracted attention in terms of exchanges within universities. So this meant that these school pupils were selected, and then they went and gained an experience of an ecomuseum in Central America, and came back, and the favour was returned, and we had some wonderful visitors here. In terms of the on reflection, I think what the pupils got out of that mostly is that they were very sort of they were given a kind of an opportunity. They were for example, the two boys ended up being head boy and deputy head boy of the school a year and a half later, which I don't know if that's reflection on whether they picked the best ones or whatever. But the kids, they were very kind of all of them kind of became kind of very quickly became kind of very confident adults. I think it really enhanced their confidence. And interestingly, a number of them, although academic achievers, have also decided to do more remote study. They've created a kind of an attachment to the area. One of whom is quite prevalent and active on a couple of committees locally, volunteers a lot locally, and he's starting his own small business here locally. So he's although academic, high achieving, the traditional route, and I'm sure in all these more peripheral communities, is that to go up to university to the cities. This is, I think, that the experience gave them a sense of connectivity and opportunity connected to their homes, and they continue to come back and ask what they can contribute. So they come back and they do maybe a bit of drone footage of an archaeological site, or even just a simple volunteer path days and things like that. So on reflection, I think it's really enhanced their own self-confidence and identity and connection to their community, and how they contribute to their community. So that's... Yes,
thanks, Angus. I mean, what impressed me actually was indeed the way that the confidence of those youngsters grew throughout the project. I mean, it was really quite outstanding from their involvement. I mean, not just being on that EU LAC project, but their involvement with the Ecomuseum itself, that they developed as individuals, and really developed as very confident young people. And that was great to see. And one hopes that they will continue their involvement with Staffin then.
Yeah, just to kind of make a final point that links in with the previous question, is that way that these opportunities, and our lack of ecomuseum not having this formal structure, it doesn't mean that we are, if you were in the museum world, you might be getting your experts to come up and visit and show you how things are done. The ecomuseum allows that flexibility of ideas, that you can invest in people locally in a different sort of sense. Maybe look at what skills are lacking, or what things can be developed in a different way, away from a structured, maybe more traditional kind of a way of accessing training, which I think has been, well, locally a lot of people have taken advantage of here.
Yeah, I'm quite interested in this relationship, if you like, between experts from the outside and local communities. Experts that do come in just need to listen and learn rather than impose ideas, and that's always a danger, I think, of if you like, bringing in people who are so-called experts and telling local people what their heritage is. And I suppose because I'm deeply embedded in those ideas of eco-museums being community-led, that, you know, that's a really significant point, really. I mean, the project that we've just mentioned actually was about community museums, looking at the contrast between community museums between sort of Europe and other parts of the world. Does any of the panel here have any thoughts on the relationship between, or the differences between community museums and eco-museums? Is it something you've had to consider? I mean, I could imagine in Spodden you could look at it as a local community museum rather than labelling it as an eco-museum, but is that something you've considered?
I think that it's where the we'd probably have to be really careful because we have the Whitworth Historical Society and Whitworth Museum, which I think is very much a community museum in itself. You know, it's not an accredited museum. It's all run by volunteers, and I think.
But that's part of the eco-museum, though.
Say that again, sorry.
That is part of your eco-museum offering.
It is part. Yeah, it is part of our eco-museum. I think it's probably more to do with that, it's, as well as the communities and the people, it's that relationship to the landscape, isn't it? That feels like it is part of what defines it as an eco-museum as well. So, and it's the people's relationship with the landscape. So yeah, I think as well as it kind of being about the social and the community, it's about the landscape as well.
Sure, yeah. It's getting away from this idea of, you know, museums as collections and buildings, isn't it, really, with experts and going into, you know, as you say, a landscape realm. Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to go on to one of Claire's questions now, which is, how do we ensure community ownership and leadership? And Claire, I think it must be in an email, I think, to Kat, said, I'm conscious that a few conversations I've had have highlighted that often it can be a university or other external organisation that leads the development rather than communities themselves. And I think that it's worth teasing the pros and cons of this tendency out. Claire, would you like to expand on that a bit?
You're muted, Claire.
I'm trying to unmute.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah.
working now? Sorry.
That's working, yeah.
I kept pressing it and it wouldn't go anywhere. My computer's also slightly overheating, so I hope it doesn't just kind of blow up. It's just a pattern I've noticed, that a lot of universities seem to be involved in the initiation, certainly, of eco-museums. And when I have spoken to a few of them, the issue of governance has often come up. And that's just very interesting to me. We haven't had any, in the Tiérna Ecomuseum, we haven't had any universities involved from the start, but we now are building a number of relationships with St Andrews. I know, hopefully, I think Karen is still here. Dundee University, for example, has just approached us to see whether we might be able to pilot a pedagogy for a just transition, which I am super excited about. Imagine that happening in an eco-museum. But I just wonder how important, it feels very important to me that the instigation comes from the host community.
Yeah.
I pipe up here because in our ecomuseum, this was exactly the way it happened. The Partneriaeth Tirlun Llyn, the Llyn Landscape Partnership, approached me in the university, and my role wasn't to go in with my size whatever boots and give them my expert opinion, rather to work alongside to understand what it was, what the vision that Arwel had in his visit to Angus in Skye, and how that would develop, and then work together with them then to get a bit of funding to do that. And I mean, I'm sorry that I'm the one that was coerced into doing the presentation today. And that's my role, isn't to be wheeled out and doing presentations, but it actually is a presentation on behalf of them rather than on behalf of the university. My view is the university should have a very sleepy, rather of an invisible role that enhances the partnership rather than take over or be the bossy expert or the ones who knows best. And I can't remember who said listening is a major part of what ought to be done rather than take over. And I think universities have a bit of a challenge because academic staff have different indicators of success or whatever in how their success is measured, and it doesn't always match what communities need. And so maybe that's a challenge for universities and outside the scope maybe of this conference, but how do you get proper community engagement without just driving your own agenda? Because the agenda has to be very much driven by communities for communities. And I feel that my role is not to do things to people or for people, but to do things with people when asked.
Absolutely.
And yes, of course, the relationship is strong, and so the dialogue is interactive very often. You know, I'm not excluded in any way, but I certainly wouldn't want to be seen to be marching in like some messiah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think your sensitive approach clearly has worked well in Penfeen, hasn't it? You know, which looks like a really great project. I mean, sort of related to this idea of sort of ownership and governance, I'm sort of really quite interested in this idea of funding as a driver of ecomuseum and indeed economuseo development, which has the potential really to make any project rather top down. So I wonder if we're looking at those kind of drivers of funding, how do we manage the expectation of the funders with the aspirations of the local communities? Angus, can I ask you about that? Because clearly, staffing gets funding from several sources, and I just wonder if that's an issue for you at all on Skye.
Yeah, I suppose it does. We're fairly uniquely on Skye is that we have a lot of protection orders across this area, sites of specific scientific interest, SSIs. Some decree from the 1940s that this is an area of outstanding natural beauty. That would mean that we wouldn't be able to put up a wind turbine or anything, or a hydro in our watercourses. So that makes us a little bit hamstrung in our reliance on grant funding. I suppose in terms of our interactions with our funders, because of the nature of how we manage our projects, they're all the decisions are made by community volunteers and by our schools. So we really kind of get in the habit of telling funders what we are doing, and rather than I suppose the nature of an ecomuseum is that in its community first and foremost. So if they're seeing the direct benefit and it could be the digger man that does the drain for the path, and it's his family see the benefit in that way, is more important than something that maybe is column inches in the Guardian or something like that. It's significantly more important to making a direct impact to people's lives than it is about an overall profile. And I suppose that's a struggle of a balance to do. Funders want us to be shouting and screaming about everything on a national level, and whereas we mostly just want to make it right for the community.
Yes, yeah.
I would echo that, actually, and Arwel would be in a better position than me to discuss the detail, but certainly Partneriaeth Tilyn Llyn would take the same approach as Angus. And also, because of the partnership, it's not a competition for funds, but a joint approach to what is required by the area. And also, as Angus said, to tell funders, this is what we're doing, because, you know, funding is a blessing and a curse. And it's a curse in as much as you have to do what it is they want to do, whether it fits or not, and whether you are able to then modify what it is you want to do in response to local demand, or you've got to stick to what you said 3 years ago when you were writing your project proposal, because that's what auditors will measure your success by. So, you know, it's quite a delicate balance to achieve.
Yeah, funders would want us to do, you know, the new website within the first 3 months and do all the visual stimulus right away. Whereas, like, the nature of an eco-museum is the buy-in the community has. So it's a slower process than dealing with a consultant and professionals and getting a bit of kind of flashiness about a project. It has to come from within.
And it also is built on relationships, which take a long time. You know, Arwel didn't come to me because he met me 2 minutes ago. It's because over time you get to know who. I didn't work with him and Pen Llyn because I met them 2 minutes ago either. It's by reputation that you build trust and decide, yeah, these are people we can work with. I'm somebody, or we are somebody they can work with. It takes time. It isn't you know, it's a slow burn.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, it's about building relationships, isn't it, always, over a long period of time. And perhaps I could bring James in at this point, because James, you've had to build so many different relationships with all those different people within Flodden. Could you say a little bit about how you manage that?
Yes, can I just sort of come back on the last point, really, about the funding?
Yeah.
You know, I'm just listening to this conversation, the discussion, in awe, really, because I'm way out of my depth in it. But these are concepts that we've never really sort of thought about. It was just basically me and my neighbour. We realised that we are the stewards of this famous site. We needed to do something about it. It wasn't ever going to be possible to get Scottish Borders Council and North Northumberland County Council to work together. There'd been the financial crash of 2008. They'd all lost their money in the Icelandic banks. There was all sorts of things going on. It was just not going to happen. And so we just decided to just get on with it. And we recruited that excellent student of yours, Peter, to get us underway. And you personally gave us a lot of advice. We got to know, or got to hear of communities who were already planning an event that would commemorate the battle, but would also bring a legacy. What was very important to everybody, I think, that we spoke to, was not just to have a party and go away again, but to really bring something that was that would last. And one of the things I think that's really been successful here is are the little groups of archaeologists and studies. We managed to get the British Archaeological Council to issue a sort of scout type badge for skills that these people had acquired, digging or cataloguing or researching. And we didn't really, our funding was through the HLF only. Scottish Borders Council gave us a very, very small amount of money. Northumberland County Council the same. They gave more in officer time and support generally. We did hear of local communities who had hitched a ride or coattailed on the back of our Heritage Lottery project in order to gain some some brownie points in their search for funding. So they used us as a kind of vehicle to get some extra monies. Yeah, we were astonished at the number of people who came forward. That we had 90, I think it was 95 different communities who came forward up and down the Tweed Valley here and elsewhere, and just did their thing. And some have come and gone. Some did have a bit of a party and just went away again, but quite a lot of them haven't. And we're still seeing the conversations locally about, oh, this started at Flodden and that started from Flodden, and I've learnt this subsequently. And we've never, apart from the HLF, we've never really looked at funding at all. So I'm not really sure that I've added much to your point here, Peter, but it's purely about community.
Yeah, I mean, what impressed me, James, about the Flodden project was just how many community meetings you held. And I remember I think came along to a couple of them and gave a short talk. And the energy and enthusiasm that you created in those little community meetings was fantastic. And that obviously made the whole ecomuseum idea actually happen. It was having those sort of on-site meetings, wasn't it, with small communities trying to put over what the idea was and what the benefits might be, and it seemed to work very well.
Yes, I was interested in what Lisa had to say from Italy about the, I think the word she was really looking for here was the animateur or the animatore, somebody who really drives the local project or the local impetus. And I guess, if anybody drove that, it was me and George, my neighbour, as just we stepped forward and said, this has got to come through us, because it's not going to happen through any public authority, and nor should it, because really this is about the community. We don't, it's nice to have some funding from the community and some support, but we don't need it. Come on, we're communities. We can work together here.
Great. Thank you.
And I think also, here I am in North Northumberland. I'm on the edge of a county which is on the edge of a country. I've got no likelihood of any support from further south, and of course I'm debarred from any form of support from Scotland, because I'm in England, not in Scotland. Yes. So it just had to be us, and what we achieved. But we hope it runs on. We hope somebody does understand the importance of the battle and all the intangibles. I tried to show the flowers of the forest there, and there are many different intangibles that arise from Flodden.
Yeah, thank you, James. I should explain that James and I live at the opposite ends of Northumberland, but both share a passion for this most northern counties. Really.
Peter, listen, the Northumberland is like a milk bottle. The cream is at the top.
Thank you very much. Okay, perhaps I can just change tack a little bit.
Sorry, Tiérna has a hand up.
Sorry?
Sorry,
Thank
you. It was only a quickie, really. I just wanted to say that I just wonder, with such a focus going forward, it feels like with funders, looking at climate change and thinking about the environment and being more sustainable, whether and that's with National Lottery Heritage Fund as well. I think there's an emphasis on connecting people with nature and landscapes, that it feels like there's an opportunity as well at the moment, maybe with eco-museums, to be able to do what eco-museums do so well, but there might be some of those funds available going forward in the future.
Yes, indeed. And I think this sort of this nature culture dichotomy is something we want to try and get rid of, really, in terms of thinking about eco-museums. And I wondered actually if I could bring Lucy in just to say a little bit more about the natural heritage dimension of the Inveray project.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of linked to the conversation about the involvement of the university as well, that I think where a lot of universities get involved, it's more from a museum or maybe social science kind of angle. But it is the two people that lead the LIFE project are environmental scientists, you know, a geologist and an ecologist, and they have no interest in managing an eco-museum from a distance. They're really just involved because there's an awful lot of research that happens in this area, because it's a very unique place in terms of the structure of the landscape and the habitats and the things that live here. And they've done some research here, and they really want to bring that back to the place where that research comes from, and to establish longer links, you know, to set up kind of citizen science and monitoring programs and ways of getting local people not only involved with their local landscape and environment, but also with science and research, and trying to kind of think all of those things together in a positive way and in a way that's accessible. And yeah, so I suppose that was their motivation for getting involved. But then in our initial discussions with people and in the survey that I mentioned, it's really clear that that the people here feel very strongly about how special their local environment is, but they're very interested in learning how that interacts with culture. And you know, no one suggested that to anybody. Like, that's just come from people's responses to us. So it is kind of I think the ecomuseum concept is very much based on that, and it does seem like it's what people are very much interested in, is not just kind of conservation for conservation's sake, or, you know, I mean, I come from a science background. I'd be interested in studying things just because they're there, but people are very interested to see how geology has affected their history, and how the landscape that we all live in affects our culture. And also that links to what Angus was talking about with language as well. Place names are a big topic at the moment here in Ireland, because there's that fear that as use of the Irish language reduces, that we'll lose those links to what actually the place names mean, and how that provides insight into who we are as people as well. And there are quite a lot of projects around the country trying to tap into and preserve in a way that also brings to life some of our terms for environmental concepts, such as, you know, ways of monitoring the weather and things like that. So although I think we're coming from a natural heritage and a natural sciences kind of base, I think it's really critical for us to respond to the general interest of people, that they want to know about that insofar as how it affects them. So yeah, I think that's one of the ways that we're kind of adapting already, and trying to link not just, say, geology, but also how that has affected archaeology and how that affected past peoples and our current life here as well. So,
settlement and so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Lucy. It's I'll have to come and see it because it looks so fabulous from all your images.
Fabulous.
Can I move on really just to talk about online presence, because that is so vital to us all now, isn't it? But skills are needed to do that, and there are costs involved. It's obviously really, really important. And so digital technology is obviously essential to us all. But I wonder how we make sure that there is sort of community input to those online presences for the ecomuseums involved in this meeting.
Well, I can tell you how we started out at the Tiérna Ecomuseum, if that's helpful.
Yes, it would be.
As I mentioned in my wee presentation, first of all, the sites that were proposed, certainly in the first stage, were proposed via a series of community consultations. And then out of that, we identified expertise in our local communities who could actually help write the narrative that then became the points of interest on our website. And then, of course, there was a kind of editorial approach to how all of that was presented. But if you go onto our website, you'll in the credits, sorry, suddenly seems to be massive aeroplane stuff going on. Yeah, you'll see where we've credited local people for essentially the content that we've put up onto the website. Now, obviously, they didn't necessarily sit there uploading it onto the website. No. That's one of the hardest things to raise money for, but they certainly created the text and many of the photos.
I suppose our approach for gaining an understanding of the online community is quite valid in this. Is at the start of our project, one of the criticisms of the way tourism was going in its direction was blamed on, you know, social media drivers, like probably Instagram and various other sort of any other kind of photo sharing. Quite early in our project, we had we offered sort of free accommodation to people who had quite large followings on social media. I think I've spoken to one or two of you about this before, what we did over that weekend that we had them kind of captured is that we took them to some of our busier locations and we spoke to them about the kind of I suppose the impact that social media was deemed to be having on the area, and it was very interesting discussion about how significant narrative is in a kind of social media context and the audiences that you're sort of dealing with. From that exercise, we obviously got some wonderful images for our project to use, and that was all very positive. But we also really gained a good understanding about kind of how our project kind of would really sit. And you're in an area such as the north end of Skye, you're kind of you are fighting a losing battle with the social media masses, but trying to find ways that you can encourage visitors through the information you're presenting to them to go to other locations is absolutely essential, because people have been approaching places like many of these locations with a tick list of the places they want to go, and how do we affect their narrative, and how do we get them to go to other places is something that we felt like really strongly about that, and that's part of the linking of locations and getting people to change their itinerary on the impact of how you sell your community was really important. So it's not something like you can cure quickly, but gaining an understanding of what the drivers are to your community is really important. You can say that, but quite often in social media terms, you're kind of preaching to the converted. People interested in ecomuseums are going to follow things related to the ecomuseums and things like that. And the people maybe who are failing to go to the standards that are expected of these locations possibly aren't seeing your stuff anyway, and that presents a different sort of challenge.
Yes, thank you, Angus. That's great. Any other comments?
Can I add something to that? In our case, the selected the sites that were participating had their websites, but the main message, or what we are trying to achieve, can be summarised in the Welsh football team's mantra, "Together Stronger." Okay, it didn't quite work out this time, but the spirit is still there, and that it's not a competition on at grassroots level, at the ecomuseum site level, and that by promoting each other on social media, then everybody benefits. And that's a sort of conceptual step that people have to take in faith, that actually if you boast about other people rather than boasting about yourself and your offer, then you actually do better. So there were Gwenan is our ways an expert on this, to make training programs for people on how to engage with Facebook and Twitter and so on. The websites exist, and you know, there's a good social media presence, but really the back to the collaboration, integration and involvement and working together rather than against each other really does work, and that enables us hopefully to keep more of the benefit local, because there are 7 sites. You can come to Penllyn and have 7 good days out. You know that there's good facilities, good things to do, a good place to have your cup of tea and buy something to take home that isn't tat, and you can enjoy yourselves slowly without having to rush off to the adrenaline-fueled 10 top 10 adventures of Eryri. Which brings me back to place names. We have that issue where people from elsewhere who can't pronounce the names decide to choose it, and that's another place where open source and common access of apps are a curse, because people can go and edit it and call a lake that used to be called something else, call it Lake Australia because it's got a name that's like a shape that's like Australia, or Llanddwyn, Lover's Island, or Shell Island, or whatever, you know, and that's a curse that we have to work against, which I'm sure Skye and elsewhere find challenging as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, yes.
I just wanted to very quickly, we had such a lovely experience putting the audio content together for the Skyline Walk, because it was a real combination of digital and analog.
Right.
So this was for the audio points that people could listen on their mobile phone and headphones as they do the Skyline Walk around the tops of the valley. We had Arthur Baldwin, who's a geology expert, local geology expert, and he's brilliant. He's a really well-known character. He does loads of guided walks, and his knowledge is just unbelievable. And then Brian, who leads he's a volunteer, but he leads Whitworth Museum, and Joe Furtado, who organises the walk, all came together with, we had a BBC producer, radio producer, and John Meredith, who's a heritage storyteller, all together in a room in the museum. And it was like an analog Google, because we'd look at the map and pinpoint sort of, you know, what are the points that you can see when you're on the Skyline Walk, that are the points of interest for the audio. And then Brian would run upstairs and grab something out of the collection, because he just knows where it all is. And would bring it down, and we'd open something up and have a look at it. And then we'd have Arthur, who would have his, you know, geology expertise that would go into the mix. And it was just such a lovely way of collecting that local knowledge, and then putting it and then the producer and John worked together to kind of present it in a really, you know, it works beautifully, the audio. It's very well presented, but it is, but Joe Furtado, you know, edited it, and kind of everybody really got involved in the process. And it just feels like it was a really lovely example of capturing that local knowledge and content for people to be able to access digitally while they're out on site.
Yeah, and I think it goes back, Diana, to your point about putting people first, isn't it? That, you know, within your community, you've got all these people who've got fantastic knowledge and ideas and their own sort of histories and stories. And picking those up, I think, is absolutely key. I mean, you know, some of those characters that you mentioned in your presentation clearly were, you know, really interesting people in Spodden, and bringing you bring the Ecomuseum to life, don't you, by talking about those individuals and their histories and what they achieved. I can remember.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I can remember.
It's definitely about the people. Oh, sorry, Peter.
Sorry, no, go on.
No, it's definitely the people is what brings it all to life. And I think that's why the doctors are like the kind of heritage celebrities, and people can just really connect with that story. And there's all sorts kind of organised now around those people as well. So Treacle Sanderson, who was kind of running, you know, faster than Roger Bannister, but like 100 years earlier. There is now a race that happens where you try and beat Treacle Sanderson's time, you know, that's organised every year as part of the Whitworth Sports Festival. So yeah, it is. It's what inspires people to do, and you know, that's very East Lancashire.
It's the best name ever as well, isn't it? Really. Yeah. No, that's great.
Can I jump back in about the digital stuff?
Of course.
Just to make a small point, which is more about the dangers of it, and something that we're really trying to figure out how we can avoid now in Ivra, and that's some of the initiatives that I mentioned when I gave you that really cluttered map earlier. Haven't survived that well, and so one of them, for example, the person that was leading the development of it unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and all of the information that underpinned a massive amount of community work and accreditation was on a computer. And myself and my colleague have spent the last few weeks trying to track down that computer because it seems like it's nowhere else. And I guess, and then another one, there's a website that's no longer maintained. The person has left the area, and the web address still listed very frequently on publicity materials, and it causes confusion, and then it's those things that are a real risk of the digital presence. And I suppose our big challenge at the moment is trying to figure out how to make a digital presence sustainable and how to make everything that we produce really open access and accessible into the long term. And we haven't got the answer yet, but they're just things that we're thinking about a lot at the moment. So I thought it's worthwhile mentioning as well.
Yes, no, thank you, Lucy. That's a very good rider really for us all, I think, just to realise that it isn't always easy to create these online documents and maintain them and actually keep them fresh and up to date. So thank you very much for that. Just wanted to talk a little bit about...
Peter,
yes.
Katarina's had a hand up for some time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, please, Kat. Yeah.
No, sorry. I just had a question, but maybe just a quick question. So it goes in a little bit of a different direction. So it was mentioned in some of the talks. So I was thinking a little bit about social justice and maybe also the decolonization debate that's happening in the heritage sector at the moment. And I suppose, unlike traditional museums, the Ecomuseum have maybe less of an institutional burden to deal with those issues because they're relatively new. But at the same time, I can imagine there are also questions around decolonization that are maybe more linked to place and landscape. And I just wondered if some of you have thought around that topic or had kind of some ideas around this.
Thank you, Kat. I mean, that's exactly where I was going to go next, actually. So very good introduction. I mean, for me, 2020 was a very important year because, I think society in general began to think very carefully about social injustice, about equality and inclusion. And I'm sure there are hidden histories in our eco-museums. And we heard about, Claire mentioned the travellers this morning, for example, travelling communities. And Diana referred really to the hardship within the weaving communities in Spodden. So there are histories there. And are there histories of marginalised groups? And also, how do we ensure, if you have ethnic communities within your eco-museum, how are they involved? How do we keep them engaged? Have they got stories that we should be telling as well? So that's a very interesting question. So I'll open that up to anyone who'd like to jump into that one.
I'll go in. So one wonderful person who has started to work with us is called Dr. Richard Tipping. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He's one of Scotland's foremost climate kind of archaeologists, a paleoecologist and various other amazing things. And he is starting to work with us on creating an itinerary which is about the time of improvement, particularly in the southern part of the Ecomuseum, where lots of agricultural improvement ideas came up from England. And it turned into something called the lowland clearances, which I didn't really know anything about at all until quite recently. And so we want to try and create an itinerary around the lowland clearances and the whole improvement and what happened to people who are also thrown off the land at that point in time too. We're also starting to find out the stories of particularly some of the big estates and the slavery connections that they had, and we're writing those into the points of interest that we have on our website. So we're just kind of starting out on that journey.
Thank you, Claire. Any other thoughts on that particular question?
Yeah, we had. Sorry.
Sorry, no, go on. You go on.
We had an activity a couple of years ago, which was a visiting storyteller. I think maybe some of you in Scotland may know her, Jess Smith. She's probably from not nearer you, Claire, than she is to us. She was part of a travelling community and sort of last generation that were coming to this part of the world. We advertised a storytelling session, and actually very, very small numbers came along to it. But what was amazing about it is actually the following session that we had meeting our older generation locally in a historical society after she had been here was the conversations about their treatment when they came to this part of the world. And it was quite interesting because it was very it definitely was led by shame of their of how these people were sort of felt about in the community, but it was also some of the most fascinating stories I've heard yet. So it's that reticence of willingness to dialogue about certain aspects of a community's past and its treatment, and beyond that, also is that there's also a continuation of shame related to things like our more cleared communities. We have several. Our population in this area would have been dispersed fairly evenly throughout, but now some of them are kind of large farm areas, and you have substantial villages, which are now obviously devoid of people, as they are in much of the Highlands. But then we moved to add these to the ecomuseum as walks, and yet there was still a big hesitance towards the kind of shame attached to the fact that these places were dramatically cleared, that they didn't really wish for people to be going to these places, and the people connected to the farms and things like that were not only not wanting people to walk there for obvious reasons, but also partly to do with the fact that there was a shame attached to the fact that these good bits of land now that previously had 300 people now had none. So. Yes.
Okay. One of the things that's really impressed me today actually is the way that ecomuseums are evolving. You know, we're constantly seeing change, and I was particularly interested obviously in the link between North Wales and South West Ireland, the way that sort of Flodden has extended its links to be able to tell so many other stories. So there's this constant evolution really. And I just wonder where you all feel we should be going next, and what ecomuseums are involving, but what should our priorities be? Where are we going next? And we haven't really discussed ideas of the development goals or climate change, which obviously are, you know, are major issues, but perhaps we'll hear more from that from Glenn later. But I'd be very interested to know, with our crystal balls in mind, where we think ecomuseums are leading to in the UK. Kat, I'll ask you first.
Oh, James had a side up, but I'm happy to. But I think for me, I kind of would hope that the movement does gain a bit of momentum in the UK, and I think there's certain kind of characteristics of the ecomuseums that would really lend itself to it, and particularly maybe the idea that because of the pandemic, people are spending more time outside and are paying more attention to the locals. So I think that's something, you know, that the ecomuseum really encourages, and I just think that museums really need to think a lot more about, and I'm sorry, I'm quoting Claire here, but you know, how we can actually encourage real change and kind of societal change, and in our relation to the world we live in. And I think ecomuseums are really well placed to do that, to achieve that.
Can I add something here, Peter, very quickly?
Yes, please.
Which is it's interesting to see where it has gone. When I started the Flodden one, The only existing one in the UK was up in the Isle of Skye. It was then called Cayman, I think, and not the Dream one. But it attracted us greatly because it had been set up to last. It had not. It had been set up. The panels had been put in place at the different sites around the northeast of the island, and I had a real difficulty in getting hold of anybody because, in a sense, the job had been done and you'd all gone away. And that really attracted us. And we still now just have our website and nothing else. So I learned a lot from you at Up Skye to say, get it done, do the job, go away. And I'm interested now that you've sort of come back, because I think it does show that ecomuseums are evolving. I don't think it'll stop.
No, I think it's very exciting actually to see how things develop. And I love, Claire, your new title, your reimagination really of the Ecomuseum. I just wonder, with your involvement with COP as well, if you just wanted to say a little bit more about that and how you hope to get involved.
I mean, I think the issue of evolution, it also applies to who's involved in the Ecomuseum. And over time, people like me will become compost, and there will be all sorts of other ideas that come in and kind of shape what the priorities are. But I do hope that as long as certainly I'm involved and my co-director colleagues who are all of the same view about this commitment we've made to the climate and ecological crises, that will kind of create a test bed for helping us work out how we might make a leap to a more livable world, because that is the only game in town for me at the moment. Dr. Richard Tipping, who I spent a lot of time with a couple of weeks back, was very downbeat about the prospects of our species. So I feel very compelled to do absolutely as much as I can in the time that we've got. And in relation to COP26, we did have a number of project ideas, some of which did not make funding, but the two which have, which are the Giant's Hand and this timeline going back into deep time that we're hoping to put up in Aileth Town Square are, and we will be promoting COP and what it is all about locally as much as we can. We're not aiming to go to COP ourselves. We don't have the resources. It all sounds like one of those massive kind of, impossible to understand and work out what you can usefully do sorts of things. But if we can create local conversations about COP26 and its importance through what we're doing, then I think we will have achieved an important goal.
Thank you, Claire. Anya, you wanted to add something?
Yes, please. I think that in these troubled times, as we emerge from COVID and Brexit and whatever, that ecomuseums have a big role, I think, in reminding everybody, from government to local people themselves, that these are homes, not just as destinations. They're not there to be exploited by people who can't go to Benidorm or wherever it is they go. And that values are important. The social, environmental and cultural values mustn't be subsumed by a desire for the economic recovery, at the expense of those other values. And I think that ecomuseums and the principles behind what we are all trying to do, including climate change, including species extinction, including all sorts of other erosions of values in general, that we have something to offer here, and we should make our voices heard.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for that, Anya. Angus.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to top that, and I totally agree with that. I suppose I would like, in terms of our kind of model specifically, in terms of what we're looking to do, I suppose in the Highlands and actually Scotland-wide, community ownership is obviously at the tip of everyone's lips, and certainly working for a community trust such as ours that doesn't have a direct income or any obvious ways to make an income, we feel that we're getting to the point of maturity that that we would be able to possibly take on some of our our more busy locations and make them give something back to the community, or even just enable our local community to take advantage of visitors coming to this area. And we've got some ideas for doing that. But equally, one of our strengths as well, and this is skywide and even Highland-wide. Sorry, the phone's going there. Is that other organisations are spending time to kind of speaking to us about what we've done as an eco-museum and looking to replicate these ideas elsewhere, and that's a huge compliment, obviously. So
great, thank you very much, Angus. I'm aware of the time, and I think I'm going to have to unfortunately close this discussion, but just to end on the fact that we were talking about evolution, and I think in terms of survival of the fittest, I mean, looking at the examples we've heard about today, I think eco-museums are on a good track and in a very good place in the UK. And I do hope that we can continue this forum again, because I've really enjoyed today. I've learned a great deal, and I hope also we may have made a few converts to the eco-museum ideas. So thank you all very much. In particular, thanks to all the panel members for their views and opinions. Thank you.